Leading these days, it just feels intense, doesn't it? Everything's complex, changing so
Oh,
fast.
absolutely. It's
Yes.
like you're constantly facing these huge challenges, this need to innovate.
Yeah, and trying to keep it all together, it can feel pretty overwhelming.
And the default often is to just, put on that brave face, act like you've got everything under control.
Right. Which is exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. We're getting into Brené Brown's Dare to Lead.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just a surface level summary. We're really trying to pull out the core stuff about courage, vulnerability, and how that actually works in leadership.
Yeah, the surprising connections. And for you listening, the goal here is really to get a handle on why vulnerability isn't the opposite of strong leadership,
Hmm.
but actually foundational to it.
And to walk away with some real practical ideas for those tough conversations, for building workplaces that feel, well, more courageous without getting bogged down in theory.
Exactly. And it's worth saying, Brown's work isn't just like her opinion.
No, definitely not.
It's built on a ton of research, years of interviews, studies with leaders all over the world, C-suite folks.
Program evaluations, that massive study on daring leadership, too.
Right. Hundreds of thousands of data points. Is really grounded.
And the big takeaway from all that data,
That we desperately need braver leaders, more courageous cultures. It's not optional anymore. And the good news, really, is that courage isn't some magic dust you're born with. It's a set of skills. 4 specific skills you can actually learn. And underpinning all of them, vulnerability.
Okay, vulnerability as the foundation. That feels counterintuitive for a lot of leadership models, right? Let's unpack that.
Well, she starts with what she calls the physics of vulnerability, which I think is a great way to put it.
Physics, okay.
Yeah, like if you're going to be brave often enough, if you're really putting yourself out there, leading change, trying new things, you will stumble, you'll fall.
So daring isn't about succeeding every single time.
Not at all. It's about being all in, showing up, knowing that failure, or at least falling short, is absolutely a possibility, maybe even likely sometimes.
So it's about the willingness to act despite the fear, the uncertainty.
Precisely. And her research definition of vulnerability gets right at that. It's the emotion we experience during uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure.
Uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure.
It's not defined by winning or losing. It's defined by showing up when you absolutely cannot control the outcome. That's the key. True bravery needs that emotional risk.
Yeah, that clicks. And the book gives some really everyday examples of what that actually feels like, doesn't it?
Oh, totally. Things we can all relate to. Like, think about a first date. We're trying to have a really honest conversation about race, or the vulnerability of trying to conceive, or starting your own business from scratch.
Big life moments.
Yeah, or even just day-to-day work stuff. Giving honest feedback, receiving it, getting fired, or having to fire someone. Those are all deeply vulnerable moments.
Definitely feel exposed in those situations. Okay, so if we accept that definition, we have to tackle the biggest myth, the one that just hangs over this whole topic.
Ah, the vulnerability is weakness myth.
Exactly. How does she push back on that one?
Well, there's this fantastic story she tells about talking to special forces soldiers, people you'd consider the epitome of courage.
Right.
And she asked them point blank, can you give me one example of courage that you've witnessed or experienced that did not involve vulnerability?
What happened?
Complete silence. These incredibly brave, highly trained people couldn't think of a single instance.
Wow.
And she says she's asked this question countless times since then, all over the world. Different professions, pilots, CEOs, teachers, same answer. Every single time. Courage and vulnerability, they're inseparable. Bravery requires that emotional exposure.
That's a powerful reframe. Okay, so what about the people who say, fine, but I don't do vulnerability. I keep that stuff separate.
Yeah, the I opt out idea. Brown basically says you can't really. Life involves uncertainty. It involves risk. You don't get to choose whether you experience vulnerability.
So what's the choice then?
The choice is whether you engage with it consciously or you let fear run the show unconsciously, which usually means you either armor up and get defensive or you withdraw. Neither is particularly productive.
That makes sense. And she suggests a way to check our blind spots here.
Yeah, ask your square squad.
Yeah.
The handful of people whose opinions you truly trust. Ask them honestly, how do I act when I'm feeling vulnerable or uncertain?
Ooh, that takes some courage in itself.
It does.
Yeah.
But if you think you're immune, their feedback might be illuminating.
Okay. Another big myth, especially maybe in some cultures, is I can go it alone. The rugged individualist.
Right. The idea that needing connection or support makes you weak, so you don't need to risk being vulnerable. But the neuroscience, like John Cacioppo's work she cites, it just doesn't back that up.
We're wired differently.
We're wired for connection, interdependence. Our brains, our bodies, they expect it. She quotes, "We weren't born to walk alone. Needing others isn't a flaw, it's biology."
Okay, biology, can't argue with that. But what about trying to, like, control the vulnerability, make it less uncomfortable, the myth that you can engineer the uncertainty out of it?
Yeah. This is where she makes a really useful distinction between systemic vulnerability and relational vulnerability.
Okay, what's the difference?
Systemic is what engineers or cybersecurity folks deal with, finding weaknesses in systems, processes, code. Relational is about people, the uncertainty, the emotional exposure that comes with interacting with other humans.
And you can't really engineer that away.
Exactly. There's that story about the rocket scientist, right?
Yeah, tell that one.
This engineer tells her he can't do vulnerability because, stuff might fall from the sky. Literally.
High stakes.
Totally. But then she asks him, what's the hardest part of your job? And it wasn't the complex engineering, it was leading his team, managing the people stuff.
So even for rocket scientists,
Even for them, the relational vulnerability, the courage to lead people effectively, that was the real challenge. You can't eliminate emotional risk when you're dealing with humans.
there was another example, too, from the financial world. Canary Wharf.
Right. Initially, the bankers were like, vulnerability, no place for that here. Too regulated, too much compliance.
Makes sense on the surface.
But then the conversation turned to ethical decision-making. And Brown pointed out, standing up for your values, saying no when there's pressure to compromise, especially when big money or careers are on the line, that takes huge vulnerability.
So trying to strip the uncertainty out of relating to people actually strips out the courage, too.
Precisely. You remove the need for bravery.
Okay, that's a big one. Now, what about trust? This feels like a chicken and egg thing. Trust comes before vulnerability. You hear that a lot.
Totally. And Brown acknowledges, yeah, you need some trust to risk being vulnerable. But crucially, you also need vulnerability to build deeper trust. They grow together.
How does that work? She uses an analogy, right?
The marble jar. It's lovely. Comes from watching her daughter navigate friendships.
A marble jar.
Yeah. The idea is that trust isn't built in grand gestures. It's built in tiny, everyday moments. Someone remembers your name. They show up when they say they will. They keep a confidence. They offer a small kindness. Each one is like adding a marble to your jar for that person.
I like that.
And betrayals or letdowns,
Yeah.
they take marbles out. You end up trusting the people who consistently, over time, fill your jar. It's those small, consistent acts.
So it's not about waiting for some massive proof of trustworthiness before you open up slightly.
Exactly. And she connects it to John Gottman's research on relationships, his idea of sliding door
A
moment.
sliding door moment.
Yeah, these little opportunities in any interaction where you can either turn toward the other person and connect or turn away. Choosing to turn towards, even in small ways, like that story about the half butt sit where friend makes space, builds trust incrementally. It's reciprocal. Vulnerability enables trust. Trust encourages more vulnerability.
Got it. Okay. Final myth, and this one's important for practical application. Vulnerability is disclosure, like just spilling your guts at work.
Oh yeah, this is crucial. Brown is super clear. Vulnerability is not TMI. It's not indiscriminate oversharing.
So what is it then, in practice?
It's about rumbling with vulnerability, which means engaging with the uncertainty, the risk, the emotions in a constructive way. It's very different from just, dumping your personal problems on colleagues.
Can you give an example, like how a leader handles change vulnerably but appropriately?
Sure. Imagine a leader facing big organizational changes. Instead of pretending everything's fine or just unloading their own anxieties, they might say something like, look, I know there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and frankly, I feel it too. What I want to do is create a space where we can talk openly about concerns. What does support from me look like for you all during this?
So it's about creating safety for the team's vulnerability, not just showcasing your own.
Exactly. It's about fostering psychological safety. That term comes up a lot.
From the Google research, Project Aristotle.
That's the one. Psychological safety, feeling safe to take risks, to speak up, to be vulnerable without fear of punishment, was the #1 factor they found in high-performing teams. It allows for the tough conversations, the honest feedback.
And boundaries are key here.
Absolutely essential. Brown stresses that vulnerability without boundaries isn't really vulnerability. It might be manipulation or attention-seeking or just anxiety spilling out. You need clarity on what's okay to share, in what context, and why.
She tells a story about a young CEO who got this wrong.
Yeah, a cautionary tale. He thought being really vulnerable meant telling his struggling startup team all the grim financial details without thinking about the impact, probably hoping for, well, who knows what. Sympathy, absolution.
The stealth intention and stealth expectation.
Exactly. He didn't have clear boundaries or a constructive purpose. He just made everyone more anxious. Not helpful vulnerability.
Okay, so let's recap the myths quickly. Vulnerability isn't weakness. You can't opt out. You can't go it alone. You can't engineer the discomfort away. Trust and vulnerability build together. And it's not just oversharing.
That nails it. And the overarching point she makes is just so powerful. To feel is to be vulnerable.
Meaning?
Meaning vulnerability isn't just about fear or shame or sadness. It's the birthplace of all emotions. Love, belonging, joy, creativity, innovation, they all require us to be open, to risk emotional exposure.
Like Amy Poehler's quote she uses.
Yeah, about dreamers and creators being vulnerable, and Antonio Damasio's idea that we're feeling machines that think. Trying to cut off vulnerability means cutting ourselves off from the very things that make life rich and meaningful, and frankly, what makes us effective.
Wow, okay. So embracing vulnerability is embracing being human. Now,
Wow.
how do we actually do this? How do we put it into action at work? The call to courage.
Right, this is where it gets really practical. And Brown uses a story about her own team calling her out.
Oh, interesting. What happened?
Well, they basically had to rumble with her.
Yeah.
That's her term for having tough, honest conversations, but the totally unrealistic timelines she kept setting.
Huh. I think many can relate. What was her reaction?
Initially,
Oh.
defensive, which is natural, right?
Yeah.
But she realized she needed to listen. This connects directly to that key phrase she uses. Clear is kind. Unclear is unkind.
Clear is kind. Say more about that.
It's the idea that avoiding directness, maybe trying to soften the blow or just hoping people figure things out, it actually causes more harm, more confusion, frustration, resentment. Being clear, even when it's difficult, is ultimately the kinder and more effective way to communicate.
Applies everywhere. Work, life.
Totally. So her first instinct to fix her timeline problem was like, download project management books, maybe get a Six Sigma certification.
The technical fix.
Exactly. But she had this realization, using the Star Wars metaphor, Luke in the cave on Dagobah.
Okay.
Luke goes into the cave, confronts Vader, strikes him down, and sees his own face in Vader's helmet. The lesson. The biggest enemy is often internal.
Ah. So Brown realized her timeline issues weren't about project management skills.
Right. They were driven by her own internal stuff.
Yep.
Fear of scarcity, anxiety, that deep feeling of I'm not enough, that was driving the unrealistic deadlines.
And that leads to putting on armor, right?
Yeah, that pattern. Feeling not enough, then compensating by building defenses, sometimes even flipping into I'm better than them. It's self-protection, but it blocks real connection and courage. Recognizing that fear is the first step.
So how did they start changing things? They used something called permission slips.
Yeah, a really simple but powerful tool for meetings. Everyone just jots down something they give themselves permission for during that meeting.
Like what?
Could be anything. Permission to be fully present, permission to ask questions, permission to not have all the answers, permission to take a break. It just sets an intention for showing up more authentically.
I like that. So when Brown circled back with her team, admitted her fears, her limitations, how did that go?
They were really supportive. And that whole rumble led to some key changes. One was just getting a better shared understanding of everything involved in projects, more connective tissue.
Practical changes.
Yeah, like better meeting minutes, clear owners for action items, and they started using a collaborative estimation technique called turn and learn.
Turn and learn. How does that work?
Simple. Everyone writes down their estimate, like how long a task will take privately on a sticky note. Then everyone reveals them at the same time.
Ah, avoids the anchoring effect, where the first number thrown out influences everyone else.
Exactly. Or just agreeing with the boss. It surfaces different perspectives and assumptions really quickly.
Smart. And the rumble also helped them see the danger of binary thinking.
Yeah, that trap of pitting things against each other, like operations versus marketing, or thinking people are either dreamers or realists. It limits possibilities, which connects to the Stockdale paradox.
From good to great. That's about holding two opposing ideas at once.
Right. The gritty faith and gritty facts. Holding unwavering faith that you'll prevail in the end while confronting the brutal, difficult facts of your current reality. Not blind optimism, but grounded hope.
That takes courage, and so does apologizing, which she frames as leadership.
Absolutely. A real apology isn't just saying sorry. It's owning your part, Even if your part was just staying silent and committing to doing things differently, that's brave.
And owning our part is crucial in any conflict.
Always asking, what's my role in this?
Oh.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, there's Colonel D-Day Halfhill's story. Really powerful.
From the Air Force, what was the situation?
She saw her unit was just exhausted, running on fumes. But instead of just focusing on workload, she asked a different question, a more vulnerable question.
Which was?
Who here is feeling lonely?
Wow. In a military context, that's brave.
Incredibly brave. And the response was overwhelming. It surfaced this deep need for connection that wasn't being addressed.
And the specific word lonely mattered.
Hugely. Using a more clinical term like disconnected wouldn't have hit the same way. Lonely, named the real human feeling, opened up a real conversation about belonging and community.
And wasn't there something about an old Air Force manual?
Yeah, fascinating. They found a leadership manual from 1948 that talked all about humanness. Used words like belonging, feeling, fear, compassion, kindness, even love.
Compared to today's more sanitized language.
Big contrast. It just highlights the courage it takes to use real human language to talk about the real human experiences that impact everything, including performance and mission success.
So the underlying message is leaders choose. Either invest time dealing with the fears and feelings,
or waste way more time managing the fallout, the unproductive behavior that stems from those unaddressed feelings.
and doing that requires curiosity.
Tons of it. Asking, tell me more. Peeling back layers, giving people white space to actually think and respond, not just jumping in with solutions.
And setting boundaries is still important in those tough talks.
Crucial. You can say, this behavior isn't okay, while still acknowledging the feeling behind it. I understand you're angry, but yelling isn't acceptable. And knowing when to call a timeout if things get too heated.
It all comes back to service, doesn't it? Leading to serve others, not your own ego.
That's the core of daring leadership, which leads us into this idea of the armory.
The defenses we build.
Exactly. Brown uses this great metaphor, like the elaborate security systems in spy movies protecting a priceless treasure. We do that with our hearts.
Our hearts being the treasure.
Our capacity for connection, empathy, love, our most vulnerable, precious asset. We build walls, moats, laser grids, all to avoid feeling vulnerable.
And the alternative to living in that fortress.
Is wholeheartedness, a term from her earlier work.
What does that mean exactly?
It's about engaging with life from a place of worthiness, believing you are enough, flaws and all. It's about integrating your thinking, feeling, and behavior, putting down the armor.
Living more authentically.
Yeah, showing up as your whole self, not just the polished, acceptable parts.
But there's often a gap, right? Companies say, bring your whole self to work.
But the culture doesn't actually support it. In fact, many cultures still reward the armor.
Like what kind of armor?
Perfectionism. Emotional stoicism. Never showing negative emotion. Avoiding tough conversations. Basically anything that suggests you've successfully severed your heart from your work.
Based on the myth that emotions just get in the way of productivity.
Right. But Brown argues that imprisoning the heart actually kills the very thing needed for brave work. Courage.
And courage fuels everything else.
Trust, innovation, creativity, accountability. You can't have those without courage. And you can't have courage if you're shutting down your vulnerability, your feelings.
Because trying to numb the feelings doesn't actually give you control.
No, ironically, it makes you lose control. Because those disowned emotions, they still drive your behavior, just unconsciously. You become reactive, defensive, without even knowing why.
Okay, so bringing this all together, if you had to boil down the absolute core takeaways from Dare to Lead for someone listening, what would they be?
I think number one, understanding vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the source, the absolute foundation of courage. You cannot be brave without it.
Okay, essential for leadership today.
Absolutely essential. And number two, building brave workplaces, having those necessary tough conversations, it requires us to actively rumble with vulnerability, to face it, understand the myths around it, get self-aware.
And empathy, too.
And empathy for others. And then number three, clear communication. Clear is kind, and focusing on real human connection. These aren't soft skills. They're fundamental leadership imperatives.
Vulnerability as the foundation, rumble with it, communicate clearly, connect humanly.
That's a pretty good summary.
All right, so for you listening, maybe a final thought to chew on. As you go through your day, maybe reflect a little on the armor you see in your workplace, maybe in your own style.
Yeah, what defenses show up. Perfectionism, avoidance, cynicism.
And then ask yourself, what's one small step, maybe just slightly uncomfortable, I could take towards a more vulnerable conversation? or just towards being clearer with someone.
What cave, like Luke's caves, might you be avoiding? What fear or insight might be waiting there for you? It could unlock something important, not just for you, but for your team, your colleagues.
Maybe think about a specific challenge you're facing right now. How might applying some of these ideas, embracing vulnerability, seeking clarity, focusing on connection, actually shift things?
Could it open up a different path forward?
Worth considering. Thank you so much for digging into this with us today.
My pleasure.
We really hope this deep dive gives you some valuable insights and maybe a fresh perspective on what it truly means to lead and maybe live with a bit more courage and wholeheartedness.
Thanks for listening. Visit our library and subscribe below for more book summaries. This has been a Sprint Reads production.